Hey there, welcome to my channel. I'm here today to do a flip through of two layered traveler's notebooks that I finished. I did another little video before this that showed how I decorated the inside of one of them. So you kind of anticipated maybe seeing these, but I finally finished them, so I want to do a flip through of them. They're cardstock on the outside, and then there's enough room for a pocket here, but I did not fold it down or glue it down into a pocket. You can glue that down. I plan on selling these. That's why I'm talking that way. Or you could flip them over. You could do a lot of things with that. So I thought I'd just leave it like that. This is a vintage card. And the reason I call them layered is I have different staggered layers in here. You'll see as we go through. This is a vintage book page, some designer paper, a cluster, another vintage book page, map page, a children's book page, a notepad. I have clipped in clusters and fabric clusters, vintage book page, a piece of wallpaper, vintage inventory sheet. I have clipped in some pieces of scrap paper, some copy dyed, some punched out on the edges, a vintage card, some more vintage paper, little piece of vintage wax. It's like wax paper, and it's got some writing on it. Some map circles. This is from a vintage Bird and Blossom magazine. This is from a watercolor, vintage watercolor book. Another cluster. This is some vintage wrapping paper, and that came from the wrapping paper. I started this just recently. I'm washi taping in a few things and putting washi tape on here. You should be able to easily pull the washi tape off and use it in other parts of the journal. I've tried it already. It comes off all paper, so it's not gonna, this is not permanent. This is from a vintage flower catalog, Fine Flowers, Tulips, from a vintage bird book. From the inside of I think that's the inside of a green stamp coupon book. So there's a lot of original ephemera in here besides the designer paper. A cluster. That's actually from a coloring book that I distressed, inked a little bit. Some more little pieces of scrap paper to use. This is the other part of that garden book. A vintage postcard from 1964 with a fabric cluster on it. This is some vellum that's printed with flowers on it. Another inventory sheet. A little bit of scrapbook paper that's copy dyed. A doily. So it's got all these different layers. Another cluster out of a vintage workhouse book. Is it called workhouse? Workbook? I think it's just called workbook. This came out of a 1970s or 60s pilot logs book, out of a children's activity book. Another children's book page out of an old embroidery book. Another fabric cluster. They're just clipped in or stapled in, and you can move them around. The staples will come out real easy. This is a vintage envelope that's been folded at an angle. I distressed a little bit of ink on this paper. This is from a garden book, I think. Vintage garden book. So, and this is some vintage stationery paper with a piece of washi tape that'll come off. Garden book. From a vintage dictionary. From a vintage children's book. doily. And then we're coming to the center page. This is from one of those art books where you how to paint. Made it the center thing with a piece of vellum, flowered vellum. Go right straight through here. The back half. Different layers. That's washi taped in. It's just from a vintage children's book. A cluster. The other half of that. Actually, this is from a recipe book. This one I said was from a garden book. So colorful, lots of different layers to use in your journaling. Some washi tape. Little bunny. And it might look like it's thick right now, but if you took all of these clusters out, which you can, and all of the little added punches and stuff, it would be way thinner. So I'm not sure. I'll have to put on the listing when I put it on eBay how many pages it is. It's over 20 for sure. I think it might be around 22. Those are original green stamps that I washi taped in. You can pull them out, undo them, some more washi tape. Another pretty cluster, fabric cluster. This came from some vintage wrapping paper. A little bit of from an old receipt and some more scrap paper to use. A little punch that says book, punched out of a vintage book. Another fabric cluster. My bee, I love my bee. Back of that map page. Lots of layers. Okay, now a piece of vellum, the back of that vintage card, and the end. And then this one is the same thing, another layered one. I haven't glued down the front. It has a vintage card in it too down here. These are from embroidery iron-on books. This is a piece of onion skin that I have inked, onion skin paper, map page, some of that wrapping paper, a little, I inked that index card. This is from a plant book, the insert that you're supposed to mail in. Some map circles that are clipped on there. Let's see. I think I showed this one in the, I have little fruit flies around here. They're bugging me. Okay, and a tag that I folded in half. Vintage book page. Some designer paper, digital paper. A fabric cluster. An envelope that I have put in there at an angle. A little piece of vellum. Dictionary page. Some scrap paper. This is embossed scrap paper and copy dyed. This is from a magazine in the 1940-ish magazine. That's a vintage map. It's not a copy. It's actually a vintage map. And this is from a garden book. And this is from an old typing book. Another cluster. Some map circles. Some more paper. Another kind of a angled piece of vellum from an inventory sheet. Not that's original, that's not copy. A cluster from an old children's book. This is from a color book from the 1980s. This is from I think it's a stenciling book. Old stenciling book. Not that old, but a cluster and some washi, some wallpaper. Oh, the washi didn't see, it won't stick very much. A little clipping from an old book. Cluster, another little bunny. This is from an old ledger. Pieces of scrap paper. Some onion skin paper from that bird book. Children's activity book. Some scraps of paper, a little bit of onion skin. This is from an old calligraphy book. This is also from an old kind of calligraphy where you can write in the squares. From about a 1940s magazine. A doily, the center of another one of those painting book pictures with a piece of vellum in the middle. All kinds of different layers, a little bit of washi, another cluster, another cluster. So quite colorful, actually. There's that bird book in places. But a lot of this stuff all just comes out. This is some scrap paper. This is a little piece of vintage wallpaper, and that's from that typing book, and one of the letterheads from that How to Type in the 1950s book. A little bit of green stamps, original green stamps, the wallpaper, another cluster, I have that washi in, come right off. Sometimes when you don't want it to. Another cluster. I hope you guys are liking these layered traveler's notebooks because I really like them. Fabric cluster. I like the different levels. After I get done with my vintage series of filling up a vintage book with vintage layouts, I'm probably going to try and do one of these in my journal with me series. I reinforce this dictionary page, I always do, with a little bit of washi because they're kind of delicate. Rest of that envelope, another cluster, rest of that tag. That tag is actually a napkin that I glued on there. A fabric cluster, onion skin, the rest of that garden book insert. Little bit of scrap paper, map page. These are some punch outs of some more wrapping paper, vintage wrapping paper. Another cluster, that one's a real pretty one. That one's actually got a vintage foyer shower sticker from the well, I imagine it could even be the 1930s that I found. And the back of that card, and the back. There we go. So thank you for watching. I'll put the links in the description box where you can find these. Thank you for watching, guys.